The success of every team predominantly lies on the arm and/or legs of their quarterback, and the 1970 Dolphins were well equipped in order to become successful with Bob Griese at the controls. The Dolphins drafted him 4th overall in 1967 out of Purdue. In the first game of the season, left guard number 78, Maxie Williams, pulls and leads interference that enables Griese to score the first points of the game. Rookie linebacker Mike Ballou got wiped out by Williams' fine block. Don Shula was a defensive back from 1951 through 1957 and was involved in a 14-player trade between the Browns and the Colts in 1953. He was a Sporting News Coach of the Year in 1964, 1969, and 1970, and probably would have been in 1968, but the Colts choked in the Super Bowl. In 1969, the Dolphins won 3, lost 10, and tied 1 game, but when they added Don Shula in 1970, they won 10, lost 4, and became a playoff team. What's this? I've just been notified by my news director of a Larry Csonka quote from his 2022 interview with The Score. When we first started to win in 1970, the crowd started to get bigger and bigger. Finally, it was standing room only. After the game, they would stay late to the point where the Miami police would show up and say, "Folks, you got to cut this out. We've got to lock up the lot." We talked with the mayor, and the mayor decided to extend it so that they could be out there as late as they wanted. We'd sit around and have hot dogs and cold beers and talk about the game with the fans. Tailgating really got to be the in thing. I like that. On with the show. Larry was cool. He shot pool with Elvis. Larry was brave. He evaded sniper fire when he visited U.S. troops in Vietnam. In 1970, he made his first Pro Bowl team by finishing 5th in the NFL in rushing yards and 4th in yards per carry with 4.5. The Dolphins were a rushing team, as they finished with the 3rd most rushing yards and only 20th in passing yards. They had 1 game with more than 200 yards passing, while they had 3 games of more than 200 yards rushing. In 1969, Paul Newman and Robert Redford portrayed Butch Cassidy in The Sundance Kid in a very successful movie. Jim Kiick became known as Butch Cassidy and Larry Csonka as the Sundance Kid due to their close friendship. Kiick had made the AFL All-Star Game in 1968 and 1969, but didn't make it in 1970, even though he had more combined yards than either prior year. He was the son of George Kiick, who played for the Steelers as a fullback in 1940 and 1945. George was an inch taller than Jim, but weighed 15 pounds less. Jim Kiick was a fine dual-purpose running back, as his 658 rushing yards were 16th best in the NFL, and his 42 receptions finished 23rd best. Some pundits point to him as being the first running back who was the third down receiving specialist. His statistics don't seem gaudy by today's standards, but ProFootballReference.com lists him as the 8th most valuable player in 1970. After spending 6 years with the Browns, Paul Warfield was traded to the Dolphins for their 1970 first-round draft pick, the third overall, who ended up being quarterback Mike Phipps from Purdue University. Crafty wide receiver who was an original Dolphin, as he was drafted in the 12th round of the 1966 AFL Draft. The Vikings selected him in the 14th round of the 1966 NFL Draft, but he opted for Miami. He was second to the 1965 Heisman voting. As a senior at Tulsa, all he did was catch 134 passes in 10 games for 1,779 yards and 16 touchdowns. I don't care if he was considered to be slow by professional football standards. There is no way that he should have been drafted that late. Tight end Jim Mandich was the Dolphins' top draft choice in 1970. He was taken in the second round out of Michigan, and he was a 3-time Super Bowl champion. Twice with Miami and once with Pittsburgh in 1978, even though he didn't catch any passes for the Steelers. Here's the one and only reception of his rookie year. Number 66 is right guard Larry Little, who was traded from the Chargers to the Dolphins in July 1969 for defensive back Mac Lamb. Little played in the 1969 AFL All-Star Game, but missed out playing in the 1970 NFL Pro Bowl game, even though he played extremely well in 14 games started. Defensive end Bill Stanfield made the Pro Bowl in his rookie season of 1969 when he had 2 interceptions for 32 yards and 2 touchdowns. Even though he didn't make the Pro Bowl in 1970, he'd go on to make it every year from 1971 through 1974. Defensive tackle Manny Fernandez was signed as an undrafted free agent out of Utah in 1968. He was an anchor and unsung hero of the Dolphins' defensive line. Middle linebacker Nick Bonaconte was traded by the Patriots to the Dolphins in 1969 for quarterback Kim Hammond, linebacker John Bramlett, and a fifth-round draft choice. Free safety Jake Scott from the University of Georgia was the Dolphins' seventh-round pick in the 1970 draft. He was a great selection as he started all 14 games and intercepted 5 passes. He also added value as a punt returner, as he finished 4th in the NFL with a 10.7 yards per return, and he returned one for a 77-yard touchdown. Quarterback Curtis Johnson from Toledo was taken as Miami's 4th-round selection in the 1970 draft. Like Jake Scott, he didn't disappoint, as he started all 14 games and intercepted 3 passes. Strong safety Dick Anderson had a terrific 1970 season. He intercepted 8 passes, and his 191 return yards led the NFL. How he didn't make the Pro Bowl, or first team or second team All-Pro is beyond me. He also recorded a couple of fumbles and had a quarterback sack. Gero Yepremian did not attend college while living in Cyprus. He spent the 1968 and 1969 season on the Detroit Lions taxi squad, which was the equivalent of today's practice squad, and was signed by the Dolphins as a free agent. He had a remarkable year in 1970, as did the Dolphins as a team, even though their season ended at the hand of the Raiders in the AFC divisional playoffs by the score of 21-14.